What's the difference between an egg and a gate valve? You can't beat a gate valve. So today I'll show you how to upgrade your Red Sea Reefer to this from the standard diaphragm valve. I'm going to make this as easy to follow as I can. I'll link everything you need to buy in the description, and there are timestamps along the bottom of the video so you can skip back and forwards as necessary. And if you're new here and you want a new reefing video every week, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out when I upload. First off then, why would you want to switch from the Red Sea diaphragm valve to a gate valve? Well, the valve is what controls the water level in your overflow box. In a perfect setup, you'll have water going down your main drain, but not your emergency drain. That gives you redundancy in case the main drain clogs, but also makes your tank run silently. And while the stock diaphragm valve is fine at first, after a year or so, when algae, sponges and so on have built up in your weir box, many people find the diaphragm isn't accurate enough anymore. And on my tank, that meant I had to put up with this noise. The diaphragm adjusts in steps and doesn't really deal with micro adjustments very well, whereas a gate valve is buttery smooth and lets you make tiny adjustments, which is exactly what you need. There are various ways of doing this, and I went for the most idiot-proof, which is not the cheapest. I just bought a full replacement part for the valve downpipe so I could cut the diaphragm valve off and glue a gate valve back in place. You can buy the same pipe for any Red Sea tank, and it's called the sump valve downpipe. Just go to this part of the Red Sea website, find your tank and click on the sump valve downpipe to find the part number. I'll put a link for the website in the description below. You then just give your part number to your local fish shop and they order it from Red Sea for around £50. The only part of this you need is the bit that connects the pipe to the aquarium's main plumbing. So I'll be cutting that off and rebuilding the rest with new plumbing parts. The additional parts you'll need are a connector to join the old and new pipes together. I've gone with a ball valve so I have a tap I can close during maintenance to avoid drips, a 90-degree elbow, a gate valve, a hose tail and 25mm flexible tube, and a length of PVC pressure pipe. I went for 1 metre, which is way more than you need, but it allows for accidents. For my tank, the Peninsula 500, these are all 32mm pipe fittings. The easiest way to check what size you require is to measure the outside of the pipe you're replacing, or it should just say on the pipe itself. If it's 32mm outside diameter, you need all 32mm fittings except the flexible tube, which is one size down, so in my case 25mm. You'll also need a pair of pipe cutters and some PVC solvent weld. These ratchet style cutters are fantastic and are well worth the extra money over the other C style cutters. Step 1 is to measure up the stock pipe so you know the exact dimensions your new pipe needs to be. The measurements will vary on every different tank, so all I'll tell you is that the distance between the two elbows on my tank was 37cm. And you'll also need to measure the distance from the entrance of the connection to the stopping point halfway down, as the pipe will of course sit inside the connector. I chose to fit my ball valve 14.5cm up because that's where it would be easiest for me to access on my tank. And I used a knife to mark the measurements because it gives a more precise marking point than a pen does. I then cut the plumbing at that point using the pipe cutter. You'll want to line the cutter up as straight as possible, but don't sweat it if it comes out at a slight angle. I then fitted the ball valve in place by hand and measured out the rest of the pipe so I could cut the right length end piece, to which I fitted the 90-degree elbow. And then I measured again to make sure it was the right length, and you really won't regret measuring too many times. Now I wanted the gate valve to sit slightly higher than the stock diaphragm does because the diaphragm always squishes my filter roll when it's full on my X filter. So I measured it to sit roughly an inch or two above where the diaphragm sits. I then cut another section of pipe to fit between the elbow and the gate valve, and you can see how much higher up the valve sits as a result. I chose a flexible pipe for the outlet because it's easier to get it in and out the back of my X filter. But most people will be better off just using hard piping, so just cut another piece of hard pipe that's the same length as the stock pipe. Once you've fitted it together dry and measured it again about 1,000,000 times, you are ready to get gluing. Now solvent weld stinks, so you're going to want to open a couple of windows or even consider doing this outside. Now if you've ever worked as a plumber's mate, I'm sure you'll frown upon my solvent welding skills, but all I did was dust off each part with a bit of kitchen roll before adding the glue. I'm sure it's better to use cleaner and primer, but I've always done my aquarium plumbing this way, so I'm sticking to it. The instructions say to apply a thick layer to the outside of the pipe and a thin layer to the inside. I managed to achieve that with this tube, but if you buy solvent weld in a tin, it usually comes with a brush, which is probably better. I then pushed the pipes together, choosing not to twist as I did so, because that's what the solvent weld instructions said. I held it in place for a few seconds, then wiped off the excess glue. And you'll of course want to repeat this process for each connection. I found this really easy, and all my joints are completely watertight a week on, so don't be put off by having a go at this yourself. It really is easy and not much more advanced than building Lego. The finished article then looks like this, and you'll need to leave it for 24 hours to set before you connect it up. I also disconnected each section of the pipe and put it in a bucket of RO water with a power head for around 2 or 3 hours to clean off any gunk from the factory. Now, because my cabinet is a cramped place, I couldn't video the process of connecting the new pipe, but all you need to do is unscrew the existing pipe at this point here, remove the stock pipe, then insert the new pipe and screw it back into place. If you're doing this on a live tank like I was, I'd recommend draining the weir box completely with a siphon before you disconnect the plumbing. And you can't have too many jugs, containers and towels around in case there's a spillage. Spilling at least some water is inevitable, and you really don't want the stuff dripping on your plugs. You'll then want to watch the new pipe for a good 10 minutes after you've turned your return pump back on. Even the tiniest leak can be a disaster, and some leaks can take a good few minutes to show up. When you do turn your return pump on, you'll want to completely close the gate valve, then open it a tiny bit and keep opening it slightly until the weir box runs silent. Now, it might take a few days for it to completely settle, but I got mine silent within 5 minutes, and so where before I had this noise, I now have this. And you'll see the water level sits just below the emergency pipe, which is exactly what I wanted. Now, before I finish up, I want to tell you what I'd do differently if I started again, and of course how much this all cost. For the cost then, most of the plumbing parts were only a few quid, but the sump valve, downpipe and gate valve were around £50 each. So the total cost was £135.76. I already had the pipe cutters, but they cost around £50 originally, which is a lot of money for a pipe cutter, but they are fantastic and handy to have around for future projects. As to what I'd do differently, buying the entire valve downpipe really is wasteful, and I was just too stupid to work out what parts you need from that assembly are called. For what it's worth, I think you need the sump pump return connector and a screw adapter of the corresponding size. Buying those instead of the valve downpipe will save around £40, I'm just that stupid and that lazy. Although I also found the Red Sea parts catalogue confusing, and given how many different part numbers there are with no pictures, I chose to waste £40 guaranteeing I'd get it right rather than save a few quid and risk getting it wrong. I'd also only do this job first thing on a Saturday or Sunday morning in case things go wrong. While all the joints I glued were perfect, the one joint I kept from the original Red Sea part had a leak. There was a tiny gap in the glue at the very top of the pipe, which I discovered after I'd fitted it. Now, fixing it was very easy. All I had to do was apply some aquarium sealant to the inside and outside of the pipe. But I did this job on a Monday night when the shops were shut, so I had to rely on asking my local reefing group on Facebook if anyone had any sealant I could borrow. Fortunately that worked out, but you should only ever do an aquarium plumbing job when you have hours and hours to spare. It would also be much easier to do this when you first set up the tank and before you put water in it. That way there's no time pressure and you can just cannibalise the stock downpipe, as you won't need to worry about your tank being offline for 24 hours while you're assembling the pipe. And finally, I'd choose hard pipe instead of flexible hose for the last part of the pipe. While flexible hose is easier to slide in and out of my filter roller, there's a pipe holder at that point of the cabinet which can only hold hard pipe, and that pipe holder ensures the pipe is held in the right place and at the perfect angle, so there's no unnecessary pressure on the plumbing joints. But minor niggles aside, this is the best thing I've done to this tank. I could always hear the water sloshing noise in the tank before, and while I'd gotten used to it, It is genuinely blissful now the thing is silent again. And while I used to fear even touching the old diaphragm valve, I can now adjust the gate valve very easily anytime it needs a tiny tweak. If you've got any questions about the install then put them in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video give it a thumbs up and subscribe for next week, and until next time, happy reefing.